Welcome to the Busy Pastor Podcast. We are here to equip and encourage pastors to be busy with the right things. My name is Greg Gibson, and I'm here with my co-host, Trent Stewart, the lead pastor at Foothills Church. And today we are talking about being busy with the right pastoral job description. Well, Trent, welcome to another episode of the Busy Pastor Podcast.
Yes, sir. This is exciting. Glad to be here.
Yeah, episode 5. And so let's get right into the content today. This is important content. Mm-hmm. And so my first question for you is, why is this so important? And what are the problems we are seeing with pastors facing an impossible job description?
Yes. So there are just endless things that pastors are doing now, right? I mean, pre-COVID, the pastoral care side of things was super heavy, I'm sure, with, visiting people in hospitals and those kinds of things. Now that's kind of backed off because of COVID. And so what took that vacuum of time there? And I think counseling is ramped up for a lot of guys. So there's a lot of, because of quarantine, because of some of the financial pressures, there's some marriages and various situations, mental health, struggling in our people, so counseling is probably picked up. But then you just got the normal things that pastors deal with. You've got the financial meetings, and so you're worried, we making budget, and what's that look like now that we're in this COVID season? And a lot of guys have no idea how to read a cash flow spreadsheet or, income, expenses, all this kind of stuff. And so kind of out of our place there. And then you've got, endless meetings where people need the senior pastor, the lead pastor, because only he can fix the issue, so like nobody else on staff could help. And so there's that tug at our, door consistently. And then you've got putting out fires and conflict every month. There's something going on that you've got to deal with. And you've got building and facility issues. Maybe you're in a building project, you're remodeling, you want to build, or maybe you're just in an older building and it's constantly breaking down, or you're trying to fix it up. I mean, now you're stepping into remodeling. So maybe you're watching HGTV trying to figure this thing out. And then it's just teaching opportunities where you're constantly teaching, whatever the class or Sunday school class or small group. And then, maybe you're teaching at a friend's church, or maybe you're teaching at this conference or at that thing. And so there's constant teaching opportunities. And so basically all of these things are great opportunities. They're good opportunities. And that's really the tug really at the pastor's job description, is all of these opportunities are good and great. And you could say are good ministry opportunities, but at some point, we all have 24 hours in the day. We all have a mission that we're trying to accomplish. And so we have to get better at deciding what we should be doing and what we should not be doing.
Yeah, so in the first 4 episodes, we attempted to define the problem, right? And getting back to a biblical job description. And what I'm hearing you say is pastors know, okay, there are some things that I should be doing, but really most pastors have no idea what should make up their actual day-to-day schedule and job description.
Yeah, I don't remember sitting down at my first church, First Baptist Church of Jellicoe. We had like 85 people there when they hired me. And I don't remember thinking about this stuff at all. I just jumped in and I hit the ground running. It's like I jumped off a cliff and I tried to build the plane midair.
Yep.
And I think I crashed and burned several times.
And before you knew it, your schedule was slammed with stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't
you're
matter.
Trying to fit in sermon prep and fit in the things that you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if my church is running 2,000 or if my church is running 80 people. We fill up our time, and for the most part, the guys that we're friends with and talk to, it's overscheduled. Now there might be some guys listening and they're chilling and they're not working hard, and so for them, the side of the conversation is get your butt off the couch and start working. But I think the majority of guys are on the other spectrum, just overworking, and so most pastors don't take time to understand who they are.
That's right.
How God has gifted them. And so they just jump right into maybe what their pastor did when they were a kid, or that they saw, or the staff, that they watched.
Right.
Not even really knowing what God wants them to do.
Yeah, and figuring out, okay, here's my gifts, here's my context, here's the season of life of my church, and now what am I actually supposed to be doing? Yeah. And so before we talk about what actually a pastor should be doing then, what should fill their time and their job description, let's talk just quickly about qualifications. What are those and why are those important before we should even get into the what?
Yeah, well, we'll probably do some more podcasts about qualifications, but just briefly, we see in 1 Timothy 3, above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperament, self-control, respectable, all these qualifications,
right.
And you can read those in 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, similar qualities. You've got 1 Peter 5 talking about how we're to shepherd the flock. And so we see all of these qualifications and all of these, high level character qualities. And so, yes, we want to understand those and we're embracing those. But before we
talk about a pastor's schedule and a pastor's job description, really defining the what, right, of what they should be doing, let's talk quickly about pastoral qualifications, because there's going to be people listening who are saying, well, what about character issues? What about all the qualifications stuff? Why aren't we starting there?
Yeah.
And let's talk about that for a second. Where do we find this in the Bible? Why is this important?
Yeah, no doubt important. Qualifications are huge. We'll talk about this in later podcasts. But 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, 1 Peter 5, these are qualifications of the elder pastor role. And so, these character issues, above reproach, faithful to his wife, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach. These are qualifications in 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1. 1 Peter 5 talks about shepherding the flock, right? And so these yes, we want a firm understanding of these qualities, but we've got to start with these job qualifications, obviously, before we start with the responsibilities.
Yeah, and I love that. I think when we start with the qualifications and now we go to the responsibilities, if we were to give a one-sentence job description of a pastor, what would you say that would be?
Well, Ephesians 4:12 really narrows it down. And so to equip the saints for the work of the ministry. And so we're called as leaders, as pastors, and this is for student pastors, worship pastors, small group pastors, whatever pastor your title is, lead pastor, obviously. We're equipping for the work of the ministry, right? And so what is that goal? I think it's very important for pastors and churches not to miss this because we're, in so many ways, we don't know what the goal is. We don't know what the win is.
Right.
And so when you go to sports, and both, we're sports guys, playing basketball, the analogy is really clear for me. Like, the goal in basketball is to get the ball through the hoop more times than the other team.
Right.
That's what wins you the games. You gotta score points, stop the other team from scoring points. In football, the goal is to get the ball across the line more times than the other team, right? So this is easy. We see this, we see a clear winner, a clear loser, it's a clear goal. But in ministry, sometimes it's a little foggy. And so we have to start with the end in mind. So we've got to start with, okay, what is that goal, right?
Yeah, we start with the why.
Yeah.
Right? And like you said, it's Ephesians 4, verse 12, to equip the saints for the work of ministry. And I think many pastors find themselves knowing that, but not fulfilling that job description, right? Because many pastors are doers. Yeah. And that's what we're getting at. Yeah. They're going to be doing the ministry, what you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, all the work that fills up their schedule, and they haven't made the shift yet to being equippers. And that's where we really want to dial in on. And I think what you mentioned, in ministry here, what does this actually mean?
Yeah.
In sports, there's a clear why and win for football and basketball. Win the game, score more points than the other team. But in pastoral ministry, what does this mean, and where do we start?
Yeah, well, you're hitting the nail on the head there. We know it in our heads.
Right.
We learned it in seminary. We just have a hard time putting it into practice. And so the win is to make disciples.
That's it. Make disciples.
Jesus gives us the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations, right? Teaching them and baptizing them. And he is with us through the whole deal. And so that's the goal. That's the win. And then the Great Commandment, very similar, right? We're to love God, love people.
Right.
When we love God, when we love people, right? In his church, we're making disciples. And so as we step into that, we have to understand what our gifts are. So we've got to begin to lead ourselves well. We have to know and understand how God has gifted us. And then, we practice those one another's, love one another, forgive one another. And so this is, big picture what it kind of looks like. But the goal is obviously, to make disciples.
It's making disciples. And so let's play this out a little bit, and let's begin really with the model of Jesus in this conversation. Yeah, so for some listening, this really is a no-brainer. Many already know this. They live this, as you mentioned a moment ago. But we have to be clear and start with a clear foundation that we're all working from and really building this job description from Ephesians 4. So let's build this foundation for a minute. Let's start with the model of Jesus and why that's important.
So in John 17, 1 through 5, Jesus comes to the end of his life. And in this prayer to his Father, he says, I've completed the work that you gave me to do. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, what is the work that God had given him to do? Because he hadn't died on the cross yet.
Right.
He hadn't even been arrested yet. Later on, on the cross, he says, it is finished. Mm-hmm. So, the work has to be something, a little bit more to that. And so what I would say the work is the work that God had given the Son to do was to make disciples. And so he spent his life investing into these 12 men. He's living his life with them. He's teaching. He's equipping them. He's preparing them. Yes, he's healing people. He's fulfilling the prophecies. He taught a lot of people. He made a lot of Pharisees mad. But everything he did could be summed up with this concept of making disciples. And so now that I have made disciples, Father, I've completed the work that you gave me to do. Now I'm ready to go finish it on the cross. And so
this is amazing.
He had clarity of purpose, right? And so that's what we're after. We want to have clarity of what the role is as a pastor. What are we called to do?
Yeah, and Jesus becomes, in this way, as you're building this out for us, he is the message and the method. He gives us a clear model for how to make disciples. And so you just mentioned he had clarity of purpose. And so why is that important?
Yeah.
And learning from his example for us.
So, he's basically saying, I did what you've called me to do.
Right.
I'm ready to go to the cross and die. Right. So at one point in our life, when we stand before God, the hope is that we would hear, well done, good and faithful servant.
Yeah. Amen.
That's what we want. And that's the life that we're trying to live. But at the same time, how do we know if he's going to say that? How do we know we're doing well?
Right.
Well, I think it comes back to that purpose. What did Jesus do? Well, Jesus made disciples. And so that has to be clear in our heart and mind. Like that is what we are called to do as pastors. And so when Paul says in Ephesians 2:10 that we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, right? So that good work, I would say, is making disciples. And he says, which God prepared in advance to do. So in advance, before we were even born, God has designed us in such a way. Some people call it a calling or a purpose,
right.
But he's designed us in a way before we were even born, so that we could carry out this work that he has given us to do. And we don't have to, climb Mount Everest with Tibetan monks to figure out, what this is like.
Which would be awesome, though.
It would be awesome, but
I agree. We don't. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can figure this out, and through experience and over time and prayer and mentors, you can begin to identify, this design that God has given to you.
Yeah. So the big question for pastors then is that how has God designed me to be the most effective disciple maker that I can be?
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. And so let's clear up that word a little bit.
Okay.
Because I think sometimes when we say, making disciples, some people automatically think, well, that means going deeper. We're just going to open the Bible, man. We're just going to love the Word. We're just going to listen to the Word, right? And then we subtract out of that evangelism. So one of the things, the purpose-driven model was great in so many ways, but one of the things I think that it did was it, in our people's minds, in the regular church members' mind, they see evangelism as this arm of the church, and discipleship as this arm of the church, and missions this arm of the church, and ministry this arm. Evangelism is simply talking about how to be saved, and discipleship is going deeper. And ministry is what you do on Sunday morning, and then mission is when you go overseas.
Right.
And so that is just so unbiblical.
Yeah, it's
and
compartmentalized.
It's so elementary. And so the mission is to make disciples. And so how you do that is by telling somebody, yes, how to come to faith in Jesus, but then also teaching them how to obey everything that God has commanded them to do, helping them serve in a ministry in your church, yes, and then also leading them into the point to where they themselves are actually telling other people about Jesus.
Yeah, that's right.
And being able to walk with them. So they have become a fruit-bearing disciple. They have become a disciple maker. That's when we know that it has been completed. So I think we've got to blow up the mentality that, we're a church that's focused on discipleship, and we're a church that's focused on evangelism. And what we're going to talk about in this podcast is why that happens. It happens out of giftedness. It happens out of, our heart and passion. And so we've got to level the playing here for a few minutes here.
Yeah.
It is all... the mission is making disciples. And so if we have a mission fund, we're really confusing our people, because we're saying, give to a mission fund, and this is going to, go to, really the mission, which in people's minds is everything that's overseas.
Right.
But if you're discipling a teenager on Wednesday nights, that's not really the mission. That doesn't count. It's not as good. So don't give money specifically to that.
Yeah, it's not.
Let's go overseas. And
absolutely.
And I'm saying that is satanic. The mission is to make disciples, whether you are in your living room or you are across the ocean in another country. And so the idea of missions for Jesus is making disciples. And I'm getting a little excited here just because
I can tell.
I'm passionate about it.
And I think to kind of summarize all of this is, when we look at the pastor's job description, yes, it's to equip the saints for the work of ministry. But when we look at the Christian's job description, it's to make disciples wherever God has placed them. And then we look at the model of Jesus and how he had crystal clear clarity.
Yeah.
There it is on how to do that, right? But pastors, we're not necessarily the doers. We're now called to kind of take the next step in training our people how to also be disciple makers.
So we've got to, out of our giftedness, equip people to make disciples. The issue, though, is that so many pastors just don't know how to do it.
Yeah, let me go back to what you said,
Okay.
And I think that's where I want to draw this out of you here is out of their giftedness.
Yeah.
And so we all now know, right? Equip Saints Work in Ministry. Now everyone's called to make disciples, but out of their giftedness. So that's the big question for pastors, right? How has God designed me?
That's the big question. And so it's not to, model Craig Rochelle or Andy Stanley or whoever in ministry you're looking up to. God's going to use them and do great things through their ministry. God's not calling you to be them. We want you to know yourself.
Right.
You've got to do the hard work of figuring out who you are, and then through your giftedness, discovering how God has called you to lead. And then be confident in how God has created you to live and to serve, and stop wishing you had somebody else's gifts or wishing you had somebody else's platform. We've become, in ministry, so much temptation there for pastors to build a platform instead of to build God's kingdom.
Right.
And it's time, I think, for us just to blow up this job description, get to the foundation of who we are as individual men, knowing that we're called to equip the saints, which is to make disciples is our purpose. So that's going to be all of our purpose. But then out of that giftedness, begin to lead our church.
Yeah, and knowing exactly where God has gifted us is so important, because that's the essence of this whole podcast, right? Is to be busy about the right things as pastors. And we want to be busy in our gifts that God has given us.
Yeah.
Because if we're trying to do something that God hasn't gifted us for as pastors, or we're in the wrong lane, as we talk about all the time.
Yeah.
You mentioned it a moment ago, it's going to be hard. There's going to be the comparison game. There's going to be a lack of joy. But the hard work begins with discovering yourself.
Yeah.
So something that you said is so important here that I want to continually draw out is as knowing how God has gifted you, right? To make disciples, yes. But even as a pastor, equip the saints to now make disciples. So that's going to be so important as we talk about knowing our lane all the time.
Yeah.
And how God's designed us. We're gonna be so much more fulfilled. We're gonna be so much happier. We're gonna have so much more joy in the work when we do the hard work, right, of knowing how God has designed us. So talk about that for a little bit.
So the word design that we keep using is an acronym, and I really don't know who came up with this. We just kind of used it, but what we're kind of adding this second word, which is design based, and that's the point, to have a design based job description,
right?
And that's why big picture qualifications and job description for a pastor in so many ways, high level. Yes, we're going to get into that, but then that filters down into my design. Right. And so out of my design, I am accomplishing this. And so the word, the first letter is D. So that just stands for desires. So what are my specific desires and passions in ministry? E stands for experiences. Because of your experience in your life, that's going to impact how you lead your church. And it should impact how you make disciples. And then the S is spiritual growth. So where are we at spiritually mature-wise, and how much growth have we experienced? And then the I is individual style. And so what's your personality? So no matter if you're a Myers-Briggs guy or the DISC profile or the Enneagram, we're understanding really how we're wired, what's our individual style, which is a huge part of who we are. And then we get into gifts. What are those spiritual gifts? Every single one of us has spiritual gifts. And then finally, natural talents. And so, again, this probably isn't new for a lot of guys, but I want to remind what we're saying is we blow right past this and we try to teach our people this stuff, but we haven't done it ourselves. And maybe we did it a long time ago, and we're definitely seeing pastors not leading out of this design. And so out of this design, what we want to help guys do is come up with and develop their personal mission statement.
That's right.
So what is my personal mission statement, which then helps me answer the question, should I be doing this? Should I be doing that? Should I give my time to this? Should I put my energy towards that? And so that's really the money statement that I think is going to help a lot of guys.
And I can't wait to unpack this just so much more with you in the coming episodes, specifically this design-based job description and really walking through each letter of that acronym. Thank you for listening to the Busy Pastor Podcast and part 1 of our discussion on what is the pastor's job description. We want to invite you to do a few things. First of all, follow us on Instagram @BusyPastor. Secondly, if you like today's episode, leave us a review wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, you can join the Busy Pastor community by going to busypastor.org and filling out the form for more exclusive content and resources. Today's episode is brought to you by all of your volunteers that cancel on Saturday nights.
Thanks for the notice, guys. Appreciate that.
If you would like to actually sponsor the Busy Pastor, email us at info@busypastor.org. We'll see you next week. Until then, let's be busy with the right things.